Hey everyone, it's Ivan with KeepAdventure.com out here for another gear review, and today talking night vision. This guy right here, which is the Mil-Spec L3 Filmless White Phos PVS-14 and a Vyper housing by Shooting Surplus. It's a mouthful. So what do all those words mean? Well, this was sent out to me by Shooting Surplus, and the tube itself inside this housing is made by L3. L3 arguably kind of the gold standard. There's only two companies in the US that actually make night vision tubes. It is Filmless, which we'll talk more on that later. And it is white Phos, meaning when you look through, you're seeing a white image, basically black and white contrast versus green Phos where you have green and black contrast. And it is Gen 3, meaning it has all of the specifications and technology in that generation of night vision. And lastly, Vyper housing. So it's a PVS-14 housing, like largely dimensionally, functionality, everything like that, but it's a different housing a little bit. It is a Vyper housing. So we'll dive into it. This particular one, as well as the other one I have, because two is always better, of the L3 Filmless White Phos, PVS-14, Vyper housing, Gen 3, all that stuff, are the Mil-Spec version. They also offer a commercial version. What is the difference between the two? Basically, these are a higher minimum across the board. What does all of that mean? Well, when you get them, you get these data sheets, which apparently are a controlled item according to the State Department and ITAR. I don't know exactly why, but these data sheets will basically give you a breakdown of the actual tube itself and kind of where it falls in as far as a minimum spec and then what it actually is. So between these two tubes, this one as well as the other one I have, they, I want to say, are, being the Mil-Spec, are like over 2,300 FOM. What the hell is that number? Figure of merit. You find that by line pairs per millimeter, so resolution multiplied times the signal to noise ratio. That gives you your FOM, figure of merit. And largely it is kind of probably the most usable metric when it comes to actually determining how good a night vision piece is, like the tubes that are inside of it. There's also some other ones which are kind of really broad brush ones used for like military procurement, like 18U, UA, whatever it is. And some just kind of random ones where if you see it, it does mean something, but not really on a meaningful level. Basically, the military, when they get giant batches of tubes, it'll be like, hey, this is the spec we need, and it'll usually be fairly low, and so everything above it on up to like a super tube technically is somewhere within there. Really, it's just giving you a baseline, but figure of merit of what your actual tube is, like, it's a pretty meaningful number. Basically, how well you can actually see things. Again, signal to noise ratio with the, I'm spacing out, with the resolution. So these, the lower of the two I have is about 2,400 figure of merit, and the higher one is over 2,600 figure of merit, which is great. And honestly, once you get into super tubes, which are like 3,000 plus figure of merit, pretty hard to find. But honestly, these are really, really good, really, really clear. And I'll show you guys some images from them. Other place these do an amazing job, which depending on what you're doing can be important, is EBI. I'm not going to dive into it. Suffice to say, it's layman's terms, kind of the ability to gather light in the complete absence of light, and you want it lower than higher. And so standard it needs to be below is 5. One of mine is like 0.2 and the other is 0.8. Both really, really good. As far as kind of the specs go, on the sheet I'm not supposed to show you, those are kind of the more meaningful ones. Are there any blemishes within the tubes? There are, and if you look closely, you can see them in some of the footage, one to the other. Doesn't matter, not in a meaningful way. There's basically different zones where you potentially have things, obviously right in the middle, and then other zones moving out. These do have some blemishes. You can see them through this one tube, and then you can also see the other little black spots, again, in the other tube. Doesn't matter, not in a meaningful way. If you have a giant one, which you won't get because these are sold beyond a certain specification where it will not have any in like zone 1 or giant ones, like I can see it being an issue, but honestly, I think that's something people more talk about as being important, which in all practical purposes, not terribly important. But since I've had this and the other one, I've put in quite a bit of time with it, but I'll show you what they actually come with. When you order your PVS-14s, they will come with this sweet bag. Pretty sure I got the same bag issued to me back in like 2000 with some 7 Bravos in it. There's pretty much no padding in it. I would suggest upgrading to something to actually protect your investment, but it'll come with that. And Skull Crusher. Also used one of those back in like 98 to 02 in the Marine Corps. Super unpleasant. Actually shot an entire night vision course, like a 3-day course with this. 1 star, do not recommend. But it gives you the option, if you spend all your money on this tube, to basically immediately get going, go run around, have fun in your basement. And then of course, you'll get the actual tube itself. Inside here, you will have your PVS-14. You also have a J-arm, which interfaces one with your PVS-14 body, and then also with that Skull Crusher. And then sacrificial lens, and I took it off. There's usually like a rubber eye cup. I ended up taking it off in part to mount my camera to this, but those are all the things that come in it. Also, as a quick aside, I mentioned these are L3 filmless tubes. Kind of a misnomer. As I understand it, as explained to me by people far smarter than me, like Corey Valdar Incorporated in their Introduction to Night Vision course, amazing dive into essentially that entire spec sheet I showed you and what all of them mean in practical terms, all of those different ratings, which I'm not going to repeat. I would encourage you to go check out one of his courses, either that or Chuck Pressburg. Hugely knowledgeable people on that stuff, but filmless. So there's basically, in the process of making night vision tubes, a film that is put on, and you really have a film, period. It's a matter of if it's a thick film or if it's thin filmed. So unfilmed is basically a really thin film. What does that mean? Between the two, filmed or unfilmed, or thick filmed versus thin filmed, you will end up with better clarity and everything like that with a thinner film. FYI. Also, as I had mentioned, these tubes are Gen 3. What does that actually mean? Well, at certain leaps in technology, they differentiate Gen 1 to Gen 2 to Gen 3. We have yet to have a Gen 4. But what Gen 3 means is that the technology incorporated is above and beyond by the powers of B, Gen 2. Biggest takeaway there, these are auto-gating. Can turn this thing on, stare into the sun. No, do not encourage you to do that. But if these are on and you walk into a lit room, or for that matter, you're going from inside a dark warehouse, bust through the door, and now you're out in daylight, these will protect themselves. There is circuitry in there that is smart enough to say, hey, we're taking in too much light, because it's trying to take in all of the light and amplify it so that you can actually see, like in the absence largely of light. But if there's too much light, you run the risk of damaging the tube. So this, being auto-gated, allows these to take in more light than you need and basically dim it down so that you don't burn this out and you can still see images. How does that kind of translate in like real world? Well, if you have these on and you're going through a dark structure, boom, someone flips on the lights, doesn't burn your tubes out, and you can still see through them. It basically dims all that light coming in and finds where it needs to be, appropriate to lighting conditions to show you what's in front of you. Is this different from Gen 2? Absolutely. Gen 2, you can most certainly burn it out by exposing it to too much light. Gen 2 is trying to pull in all of the light just like these are, and I think they made some basically kind of backdoor workarounds where it'll start to kind of do the same thing or attempt the same thing as autogating, but it is not the same. And lastly, the Vyper housing. What does that mean? Basically, there is a like Mil-Spec vanilla PVS-14 housing. Think of this as a kind of upgraded, more robust version of it. Different places where you have stronger, more material for strength and durability, and like more threads, more surface area, things along those lines. Basically an upgraded version. Dimensionally though, and as far as controls, all your same stuff. Over here, you can unscrew this. It takes one AA battery, and then up front, right here, you can go ahead and adjust your gain, up or down, depending on lighting conditions. And here, you can basically adjust your focus. Then on this back end, right here, we can adjust for, basically, think of it as fine focus for your eye, getting them adjusted to you. And then lastly, we have our control button right here where we can turn it on, turn it off, and then lastly, IR, you'll pull and twist, and that little lens right there. Basically, it's a little IR light. Think about it as kind of a task light for reading maps, things like that. As mentioned, I've had these two. So as far as one being about 2600 FOM, the other about 2400 FOM, I will show you some different images of both these respectively in some different lighting conditions. Initially, again, paired with a Gen 2 PVS-14 that is green Phos. And we'll look at it both in a park as well as some stuff kind of looking at EBI in the dark. Right here, we are looking at the L3 Filmless 2600 FOM in the park. Right here, we're looking at the L3 Filmless 2400 FOM in the park. And we're looking at the Gen 2 Green Phos PVS-14 in the park. And here we'll take a look at these as well as a Gen 2 Green Phos PVS-14 in the absence of light in the basement. Kind of get an idea of that EBI, where that comes into play. With all that said, what has been my experience with these two L3 Filmless White Phos Gen 3 PVS-14s and Vyper housings? Well, initially I ended up using one just on the J-arm it came with on a bump helmet. Shot it in a one-day introduction night vision course with Koiveldar Incorporated. Did great for me in there. And then I ended up using two on a bridge with a ballistic helmet, which was not the most comfortable. I think it was like Hard-Headed Veterans or something like that, and kind of a vanilla bridge, but ended up running them in a two-day night vision course with Koiveldar Incorporated, and they did amazing. Basically, I took the magic of having a really nice, clear, bright, high foam white Phos tube and doubled it. Cannot say enough about binocular vision. Then moving forward, I ended up running both of these, actually bridged this guy right here, which is the Pano bridge by Noise Fighters on this Wilcox G24, I think, mount, and ran it on this, and then I want to say the skull mount by OpsCore, and I shot this setup in a 3-day night vision course down there with Thunder Ranch. Did phenomenal setup like that, especially being able to use situationally that Pano bridge, move these things out. Really great job. And then in addition to that, I used them in a bunch of different runs going through the shoot house. I've been incredibly impressed with these PVS-14s. Again, these are the Mil-Spec ones from Shooting Surplus. They've done an incredible job for me, and yeah, they just keep going. By way of example, I actually loaned them to a buddy. We were doing some dry runs in a shoot house. He threw them on, went into the shoot house, was hanging out talking, heard a crash. He came back a few minutes later, he's like, "I'm so sorry." Basically dropped him from about 6 feet onto concrete. We're no longer friends. Actually, it was probably my fault because I don't think I had them set up with a tether on the bridge that they were on. Totally fine, didn't hurt them. I would not celebrate it, but no, they're pretty durable. And I've used them in the snow, in the rain, everything like that, and they just keep going. Do a pretty rad job. I have put a lot of time in with them, and they're definitely an investment. Definitely an investment. And it really comes down to what you're looking to do with them. I will say between the two, green Phos or white Phos, these obviously the white Phos, they do a great job. For me personally, I find there to be more contrast with a white Phos than I get with the green Phos. If you're getting into night vision, it is expensive. As I mentioned, this being the Mil-Spec L3 Filmless White Phos Gen 3 PVS-14 in a Vyper housing, about $4,400 through Shooting Surplus. It is a lot of money. Is it expensive? Not really in the night vision world. If you haven't already bought something that you regret, is a good first step into that world because it's giving you something that you don't immediately need to go upgrade because you're like, oh, I'll get a Gen 2, whatever, hashtag just as good. Like, no, you got something good out the gate. So as I mentioned in my journey, had this thing, ended up using it, shooting with it, then got a second one, was able to bridge it, opened all kinds of doors, eventually put it on a Pano bridge, was able to do even more with these two things. And then lastly, if I choose, I can actually, again, because I have two good tubes, started with a good one, got an additional good one through Shooting Surplus. If I want, I can go through a reputable company, send these in, and actually get them dropped into a housing. So then I have true dual tubes, if that's something you want to do. Or if you're just like, I'm ready for the deep end, got some deep pockets, through Shooting Surplus, you can get some DT NVSs, like straight up dual tubes, probably around like 10 grand or so. But this gives you a really good starting point with the ability to grow and get get a better setup as your budget allows as well. Pretty solid from Shooting Surplus. And if you appreciate my content and want to support it, I greatly appreciate it. Whether it's liking and sharing videos or going over to kitbadger.com, picking up KBAT target pads, stickers, patches, things like that. Or lastly, supporting me directly through Patreon. Through Patreon, you usually get early access to videos, as well as some exclusive stuff. And lastly, answering questions. If you have questions for me, happy to answer them over there on Patreon. either direct messaging or on our Discord server. Answer all those questions over there. But as always, thanks for joining us at kitbadger.com. Look forward to seeing you next time.